After not seeing him for a month, John handed me a divorce lawyer's business card without even asking if I was okay or how I was feeling. Divorcing a wife who doesn't work and paying her $1,000 a month in alimony sounds good, he chuckled. Standing beside him, Emily wrapped her arm around him, wearing the same smug expression. Fine, let's divorce then, I said casually. John seemed a bit surprised but quickly smiled at Emily. John isn't much of a thinker, which makes my plan easier. After the divorce was finalized, I started my revenge plan. I want to make them both cry as a celebration of my recovery. My name is Sarah Wolf, and I'm a 47-year-old illustrator and children's book author. I love drawing. I have 2 childhood friends, John and Emily. John is also my husband. It all started when John asked me out after high school just as I was heading to a different college. I was surprised because I thought he liked Emily, but I couldn't say no to John, whom I secretly liked. After talking to Emily about it, I accepted John's proposal. Emily's behavior had been problematic since we were teens, but she was still a dear friend to both John and me. She had a habit of stealing other people's boyfriends and then dumping them when they became obsessed with her, causing problems repeatedly. Her parents were concerned, so John and I often spent time with her to keep an eye on her. John and I got married when we were 25. 4 years later, Emily introduced us to her fiancé, George, who worked for a top-tier company. Nice to meet you, Sarah and John. I've heard so much about you. Looking forward to our future together, George said politely. We all got along well and spent holidays and vacations together, taking trips and enjoying drinks. However, things started to change after Emily got pregnant 2 years into her marriage. John and I had many siblings, so we decided we didn't need children. We loved kids but didn't want to actively care for them. We enjoyed our freedom to travel and drink. While we found families with children heartwarming, it was never something we wanted for ourselves. When Emily announced her pregnancy, John's attitude changed. He quit smoking because Emily couldn't stand the smell and even offered to drive her to doctor's appointments using his vacation days. I warned him that George might get upset if he was always with Emily, but John argued back, "You have work, don't you? She's our childhood friend and needs help. You're heartless." I said I've been buying things and helping where I can, but going with her to the obstetrician is crossing the line. When I said that, John frowned and then glared at me. Why? Because Emily wants it. She says she's anxious about the checkup. I can't just let her go alone if she's anxious. All the more reason for George to go with her, right? If you go with her every time, it's almost like you're the father of the baby, I argued. You're not going to get pregnant anyway, so what's the problem? John snapped. He didn't take my concerns seriously and started saying I was being annoying. We hardly ever fought during our marriage, but things changed when Emily got pregnant. Our arguments increased and continued even after Emily gave birth. John started spending even more time with Emily and their child, Emma. When Emma was 6, an incident occurred at her graduation ceremony. The day before the graduation, John suddenly started rummaging through the closet. "John, what are you doing?" I asked. "I have a meeting tomorrow," John said. His workplace had a casual dress code, but he always kept a few suits ready for client meetings. Now, all the suits were thrown on the bed. "Just trying to decide what to wear for the graduation ceremony," John replied. "What? You're seriously thinking of attending the graduation?" I asked, incredulous. "Yeah, George can't make it. Emily asked me." "Wait, that's absurd, no matter how you look at it," I said, raising my voice in denial. John's face turned sour immediately. I knew he occasionally picked Emma up from kindergarten, and I had done so myself when asked, but it was nonsensical for a childhood friend who wasn't even a biological parent to attend a graduation ceremony. "What, you still doubt me, Emily? I'm disappointed that you can't even help out." "That's not the point," I protested. "I've been buying things and helping where I can, but going with her to the obstetrician is crossing the line," I said. John frowned and glared at me. "Why?" "Because Emily wants it. She says she's anxious about the checkup. I can't just let her go alone if she's anxious," he said. All the more reason for George to go with her, right? If you go with her every time, it's almost like you're the father of the baby, I argued. You're not going to get pregnant anyway, so what's the problem? John snapped. He didn't take my concerns seriously and instead started saying I was being annoying. We had hardly ever fought during our marriage, but things changed when Emily got pregnant. Our arguments increased and didn't stop even after Emily gave birth. John started spending even more time with Emily and their child, Emma. When Emma was 6, an incident happened at her graduation ceremony. The day before the graduation, John suddenly started rummaging through the closet. "John, what are you doing?" I asked. I have a meeting tomorrow, John said. His workplace had a casual dress code, but he always kept a few suits ready for client meetings. Now, all the suits were thrown on the bed. No, just trying to decide what to wear for the graduation ceremony, John replied. What? You're seriously thinking of attending the graduation? I asked, surprised. Yeah, George can't make it. Emily asked me, he said. Wait, that's absurd, no matter how you look at it, I said, raising my voice. John's face turned sour immediately. I knew he occasionally picked Emma up from kindergarten, and I had done so myself when asked, but it didn't make sense for a childhood friend who wasn't even a biological parent to attend a graduation ceremony. What, you still doubt me and Emily? I'm disappointed that you can't even help out. That's not the point, I protested. First, I started by increasing my income because I had been saving by doing housework and taking care of Emma, which had drastically decreased my earnings. George switched to working from home, and when Emily and John went out, he would bring Emma to my house, and we would take care of her together. Neither Emily nor John realized that we knew about their relationship, and we were able to gather solid evidence. Once we had enough evidence and were ready to take our revenge, we discovered a shocking truth about Emma. George and I struggled with the decision but agreed that we didn't want to hurt young Emma, so we decided to wait until she was an adult to take our revenge. However, even though we decided to endure for 10 years, I was struck with a serious illness. I needed long-term hospitalization and, even at best, wouldn't be discharged for at least 2 years. Although I could work from my hospital room, I would have to reduce my workload. After informing George about the situation, I consulted John. However, John's reaction was indifferent. Mom will visit you once in a while, he said. John no longer seemed to have any affection for me, as he didn't even ask about my condition or the name of the disease. In reality, John only visited once a month or every 2 months. After Emma's 15th birthday, she started acting strangely. Although she used to visit me almost every day right after I was hospitalized, she became distant after her 15th birthday. George and I couldn't figure out why and were puzzled. Even when we asked Emma, she just said, "Don't worry about it." We ended up learning the reason from John, who rarely showed up. "Hey, it's been a while," he said as he walked in without even knocking. "Yeah, it has," I replied. John, who had completely transformed into a flashy appearance, handed me a divorce lawyer's business card without even asking if I was okay or how I was feeling. Divorcing a wife who doesn't work and paying $1,000 a month in alimony, that's the deal. So take care, John said, grinning from ear to ear, standing beside him. Emily wrapped her arms around John with a similar expression on her face. "Fine, let's divorce then," I casually agreed. John seemed surprised for a moment but quickly exchanged smiles with Emily. It was good that John wasn't the type to think too deeply. That's why my plan worked so well. After receiving the notification that the divorce was finalized from John, I decided to start my revenge plan against the two of them. I would make them cry as a celebration of my recovery. I promptly took action. First, I contacted George to transfer hospitals. Then, I informed my lawyer that they would be mediating between the two parties from now on. George also began to act. He moved near my new hospital with Emma and started visiting me frequently. Emma still had a gloomy expression, but I was happy that she came to see me every day. Most of my belongings were already in the hospital room, so I told John to dispose of the rest. I didn't want to bring anything that the two of them might have touched into my new life. Once the hospital transfer and George and Emma's move settled down, I received a call from John. I had only left my seat for a few minutes, but my smartphone already showed 30 missed calls. I answered the phone, feeling exasperated. "What? Hey, what the hell is going on?" John shouted. I could hear the voice of a troubled real estate agent behind John's panicked voice. I also heard Emily yelling, which made me feel sick. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I replied coolly. "It's obviously about the house. Why do we have to move out?" John shouted at me as if it wasn't his fault at all. "Obviously, because that's my house," I said. John seemed to have completely forgotten, but the truth was that the house we lived in was a room I rented as a workspace when I started working as a freelancer. At that time, I didn't have enough income to maintain 2 houses, and John didn't have enough income to live alone, so he ended up moving into my place. Therefore, John had never paid the rent or utility bills for that room. Although I received some money from him for living expenses, it wasn't enough to maintain the place. Unfortunately, that room was already canceled. It was far from the hospital I transferred to, so I had processed the cancellation the day after submitting the divorce papers. I didn't inform John because the real estate agent, who knew the situation, said they would contact him. George and Emma suddenly disappeared. and our house was sold. What are we going to do about our new house? John asked. I don't know. Maybe stay in a business hotel for now, I suggested. As I turned on the speaker and started working, John yelled in frustration, "Don't screw with me." However, he seemed to remember something and started speaking in a more soothing tone. Well, whatever. When will you transfer the money? We're running low on cash. What are you talking about? I asked. Huh. Don't mess around. I told you to pay $1,000, didn't I? Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that, I responded nonchalantly. John started screaming incoherently on the other end of the phone. Apparently, he thought he could get money from me and had been squandering it. Even if he had $1,000 left, how did he plan to get by for the rest of the month? Hey, don't just stay silent. Say something, he demanded. There's really nothing to talk about, I said cheerfully. Anyway, we're basically strangers now, so please don't contact me anymore. You'll hear from my lawyer. Huh? Lawyer? Hey, wait a minute, John exclaimed. I hung up without listening to John's response. He tried calling back several times, but I ignored it, and eventually, the call stopped. However, angry that I didn't answer, John started ignoring calls from my lawyer. He certainly had a childish side, but I never imagined he'd be the kind of person who didn't mind causing trouble for others. I sighed deeply at John's selfishness. A few months later, after a temporary discharge from the hospital, I visited John's parents' house. In front of me were John and Emily, both looking small and trembling. Telling my parents is a low blow, John said. Oh, I just reported that we got divorced, I replied. John glared at me, but he shrank back under his father's stern gaze. I had a great relationship with my in-laws, even visiting and dining with them when John wasn't around. Despite being so well-loved, I felt it was wrong not to share the details of our divorce, so I went to visit them. Is it true that you're remarrying Emily? John's father asked. Yes, it's true. Emily, Emma, and I are going to start over as a family, John said. What are you talking about? Your only family is Sarah, his father said. She's not my family anymore, John replied. John's words made his father frown with a look that seemed to say, give me a break. John shook his head a few times and then handed me a piece of paper. It was a bill from a nearby luxury hotel. What's this? I asked. It's the bill from the hotel we stayed at, John said, acting as if it was obvious. He then suddenly collapsed. Oh, what the heck, Mom? I didn't raise you to be like this, my mother-in-law said, gasping for breath. John looked at her with disbelief. Next to him, Emily wore the same expression. Why are you so angry? It's just that the family is changing because I'm getting married. Plus, you'll have a grandchild, a blood-related one at that. Aren't you happy? John asked. My mother-in-law, looking as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, glanced at Emily and then turned her gaze to me. Both my in-laws understood that I didn't want children and still treated me as their own daughter. Of course, they treated Emily, my childhood friend, similarly, but there was always a boundary between a daughter-in-law and a friend. I remember Emily often complaining about my mother-in-law, so I was certain she wouldn't be happy about this situation, and Emily should have known it too. You doted on Emma, right? It'll be your grandchild, so you'll be happy, right? Emily said. It's because she's a child I've known since she was little. Oh, but half of her blood is from John, right? Emily showed no sign of remorse and acted as if she couldn't understand the problem, which gave me goosebumps. At that moment, someone who had been silent until now spoke up. Enough already? It's disgusting. Huh! It was Emma. She had been playing with her smartphone in the corner of the room, but now spoke to Emily without looking up. The room fell into a stunned silence. My dad is the only one I consider my father. Whether we're related by blood or not, he's the only one. But you know, John has always been the one to attend your school events. I heard everything from Dad, how he was always informed of the event dates after they were over, how eventually even the events themselves were kept from him. But Dad always said I was his daughter, so I am his daughter, and I will never be yours. Emma glared at Emily as she said this. Then, sitting beside me, she switched to a more concerned tone. You know, when I found out about this, I thought you would hate me. But Dad said that wasn't the case, so I came here today. Emma, I love you so much. You were so kind to visit me every day while I was in the hospital. I was really happy, I said. Sarah, Emma, perhaps relieved of her anxiety, teared up and hugged me tightly. It might indeed be a child resulting from an affair between John and Emily, yet it's a child I've taken care of for 15 years. There's no way I don't have affection for her. Speaking of which, Emily, weren't you curious why I wasn't surprised when I found out Emma is John's daughter? Ah, Emily looked startled. Before she could speak, a new person entered the room. We knew from the start, 10 years ago, actually, George. Emily started to panic when George suddenly appeared, understandably so, as she had recently unilaterally demanded a divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I was shocked when you mentioned divorce, George said. Oh, and unfortunately, you're not divorced yet. The divorce papers are still here. Didn't you notice? I figured it wasn't in Emily and John's nature to confirm things, but I couldn't help but be stunned that Emily, despite the 100-day waiting period for women to remarry, hadn't noticed for months. So Emily is still my wife, and Emma is still my daughter. Well, since there won't be a wife, wait, what do you mean a 15-year-old can choose their parent? That's not true, Emily said. She looked at Emma, who frowned back and held my hand. Emily was speechless and glared at me. Suddenly, John burst into laughter. So, that's what it is. You two are together, huh? But too bad. Isn't it impossible to live on George's salary alone? Can you stop making weird assumptions? It seems George earns double the amount you think, I replied calmly. John chuckled, dismissing it as a bluff. Besides, it's impossible for you to work while dealing with your illness. You'll just die miserably somewhere. I laughed at John's misunderstanding. Seeing me laugh, John grew frustrated. You didn't know about my income, did you? It's probably just a bit more than a part-time job. John continued, doubting my financial stability. No, it's different. My annual income is $500,000, I revealed. John and Emily were shocked. Over the past 10 years, I had become a popular children's book author, and my income had skyrocketed from essays and interviews. A film adaptation was also in the works. Liar, John exclaimed skeptically. Do you want to see? I showed Emily my bank account screen, clearly displaying large monthly deposits. She was speechless. Sarah, let's make up, John suggested, trying to backtrack. What are you saying? Emily was furious at John's words. Ignoring John's comments, I took Emma's hand and said goodbye to my in-laws, leaving their house. John, who had lied about his job, lost it and ended up working on a fishing boat, as my father-in-law arranged. After losing custody to George and divorcing him, Emily seemed uninterested in John, who couldn't afford luxuries and didn't pursue her. She was disowned by her family and lived alone in a rundown apartment. Emily hadn't worked since getting married and struggled to find full-time employment due to her lack of experience. She juggled multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet and pay child support. Meanwhile, Emma worked hard every day after entering high school, aiming to study abroad at a prestigious university overseas. She was diligent and dreamed of translating my picture books to share them with children worldwide, which made me proud. As for me, my picture books were selling well, and I received offers for anime adaptations and merchandise. Though still hospitalized due to my illness, my condition was improving, and my doctor suggested I might leave the hospital next year. Every day, George and Emma visited me. Recently, George confessed his desire to remarry me, but I hadn't given him an answer yet. Despite my uncertainty, I found myself developing feelings for him, especially since he expressed wanting to live together once I left the hospital. While considering his proposal, I continued working on my picture books every day, hoping for a happy future together. Today, once again, I wove stories for the joy they bring.